Coogs house. Rigging recruiting rankings has been exposed and it's going to impact the Big 12 and thus it's going to impact the Houston Cougars.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. Appreciate making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Coogs. We're doing the conversation, but you don't know what to say, even though you're an everydayer here. You don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below. Okay, listen, I'm already got mine on the beach. We're going to Rockport at the end of the month. Tell me what if you're okay, fried shrimp, you're more of a tartar sauce or a red sauce kind of person. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. More on that fun later. We got to get into this recruiting story where some of this is starting to unravel before our eyes. More on that in a second. The first segment, I do want to talk about a space race and what that looks like as a rivalry, why that's important in the second segment. Third and final segment, we are looking at some legacy recruiting as well. But first, I want to give some shout out to, I don't give a lot of shout out when I don't have to. Stick'em 365 folks started this in the last few days, and it's continuing to unravel here. But Colt Barber is one of the owners at Stick'em 365, his Baylor outlet. It's kind of grown to be bigger than that. And so he's a little Baylor focused, obviously, but they're starting to pull together evidence of how rivals and other recruit ranking services are showing their hand a little bit too much in how they're impacting recruiting rankings. Now, quick background here. The story starts with pointing out that big 2026 commit for them, Quinn Murphy, had jumped up to 187th nationally in December of 2024. People kind of assumed he'd be an SEC commit. He plays for a small private high school coached by Jason Witten, Tennessee guy, right, etc. He commits to Baylor and drops a full star and down to the 60th player in Texas. Listen, I think the kid's really good too. 60th player in Texas. They also, on the Baylor side of things, point out London Smith went from the 50th player nationally to outside of the top 150 within months after having committed to Baylor with a commitment to Baylor in January. Those months had no football played in them. He just dropped randomly. This conspiracy was the word I started throwing out when Jordan Clay, who's a wide receiver from Houston Madison High School, was in the Rivals top 60 in February and then was inside of the top 250 in the country since July 2024, was in the top 50 in February. And then 3 days after his Baylor commitment, he dropped all the way down to the 49th player in Rivals in Texas. We've seen this across the whole conference. The Wright Lions was the 6th overall player committed to Oregon. He dropped all the way down to 43rd after committing. He was once he picked BYU over Oregon, I should say. He dropped all the way down to 43rd. They just picked up another kid. First name's Beaver, the kid that Oregon just picked up. Their fallback guy jumped from outside of the top 300 into the top 5 in the country by committing to Oregon. Wright Lions had turned Oregon down. This was clearly Oregon's second option in the 2026 class as far as quarterbacks go, and he got shot up from outside the top 300 into the top 5 or 10 or whatever. Keyshawn Henderson's seen this himself, right? Houston Cougar 5-star commitment, close to home for Houston, obviously. Has seen people kind of ding his rating here and there, dropping a few points here, dropping a few points there after committing to Houston and then ultimately turning down other options and shutting off his recruitment. I'm sure we'll see that in the coming days and weeks with 4-star, high-end 4-star Paris Melvin and Jaden Warren as well. It's all bogus. It all keeps happening. I don't know why it's going to happen, the Houston Cougar recruits, but I would put money on it happening at some point. That's why we're going to continue to address them as the high-end 4-stars and 5-stars they are, because that's what they were when they committed, right? Now, I could point out Keyshawn was the player of the day at Elite 11 for the first 2 days, but somehow doesn't win MVP out of the 3-day event, or he was MVP at the All-American game, or that every write-up from every 7-on-7 elite quarterback event, everything is just oh my God, this guy's the real deal. But he's kind of seen things waver. But I think I want to stress why this matters. Recruit rankings and their composite play a role in the FPI, the Football Power Index, which is an ESPN metric, but it's presented as an analytic when comparing conferences and teams across conferences like that at college football playoff committee meetings, and when they're trying to like slot what ball matchups happen here when it can play. Obviously, sometimes Big 12 gets a spot or whatever, but when it can come into play, you'll see it come into play sometimes, especially in the college football playoff room where they're looking at these analytics, and the FPI seems to be a heavy indicator, right? Recruit rankings, as in the recruit ranking for the people in your current roster, makes up roughly a quarter of that analytical equation. That's the composite. So rivals and on3 combined to make a big chunk of that composite over the course of this summer. And so now this is not just the belly aching fans of your SEC or Big Ten people at your water cooler and group chat. This actually impacts what bowl games or college football playoff games you could play in, because college football is not like college basketball, right? You can't just win games that you're not in. In college basketball, you win your conference, you get to the big dance, you can win the big dance. I don't care if you're in the A10. If you win your conference, you get to the dance, you can win your dance. And the college football playoff, even with an expansion to 16 teams, they're just gonna pick 16, right? And I know that we're pushing for the 5-11 model, and that'll at least get one Big 12 team in. Your marketing seems to think we can get a couple in the near future. Totally get that. However, if recruit rankings are going to make up a portion of this analytical model, we need to have a more objective way to do this, right? Because 5 stars that get 5 stars after their junior year of high school cannot cease being 5 stars without playing football or some major thing happening, right? They can't just lose a star based on where they decide to go. Just because they didn't go to a school that necessarily gives you the clicks, the dollars, the whatever, the traffic, or the Nike school or whatever, right? They can't just get dinged for that and then ultimately have their program dinged later, right? I don't have the objective solution to this. It's obviously very difficult to rank high school kids across the country, and I don't mean to say that job is easy. I don't envy that job. I talked to Brian Smith a lot, Locked On, the Portal host, who has done that work before, and he will tell you that sometimes you are relying on listening to what others are saying because you just can't watch every video of all of the thousands of high school football players across the country, right? However, once a guy has earned some of these accolades, it feels silly to like start replacing and moving them. This obviously the Oregon quarterback thing being significant enough, or Bell and Keyshawn Henderson in that comparison from the 11 being significant enough, right? I really, really want to see more solutions to this, though, because I do worry that based on current trajectories, when Houston is built, we're talking about a rebuilding program. And so when Houston is built and these things are better than they are now, and Keyshawn Henderson is that sophomore, and Jaden Warren's catching touchdowns, Kobe Young is catching touchdowns, Paris Melvin's catching touchdowns, they're all returning kicks, and all those, all the chaos, the fun is happening, that ultimately a fear of mine is that because the Big 12 gets dinged in these things, that rebuild program will have a glass ceiling that I think a lot of us might be uncomfortable admitting in the current system. We want to change the system for when we're ready to compete in it, and we're pushing for that, obviously. Now, am I going to talk myself into Connor Wegman winning every Saturday this year, every Thursday and Friday too? You better believe it. That's typically what I do. But I am looking at the future of this and saying, okay, the problem here is not that it's going to hurt Houston this year. It might hurt Baylor this year. It might hurt Tech this year. It might hurt Arizona State this year. It might hurt Iowa State or Kansas. Their Big 12 is loaded, and they don't want to admit it, right? It might hurt them this year, but Houston's going to be that. I've got faith in what they're building, and if Houston's going to be that in the future, then we've got a problem, because this ranking will matter regardless of who's actually good or what production matters. This ranking, this arbitrary, oh, I like all the uniforms at Oregon. Oh, I like this Big Ten school. Oh, I like that fight song. It's not that silly, but it can feel that silly. That stuff matters. We'll be following that and more very, very soon. Before we get to more things that matter, like rivalries, do want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by everybody's over at FanDuel, America's number one sports book. Because right now, sports are in full swing. I know y'all saw the swing off at the end of that All-Star game. That was sick. I liked that. Whether you're into swinging baseball bats, golf clubs, tennis rackets, or swinging your leg in a soccer game, all kinds of action can be found at FanDuel, and that's the best way to make all of that action much more exciting. Like I like the same game parlays, stacking things up feels nice. I like getting the action late. If I missed opening pitch, if I missed the start of the match, I can still get in on the live action later. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5, get $150 back in bonus bets if your first bet hits. Open FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Park Ranger, the Locked On Coogs here. We're going to talk about a little bit of space race rivalry kind of things. And listen, I understand this keeps coming up. This is the second segment of the first segment because this keeps coming. We talked about this some before, but I want to shout out Joe Duarte, who asked you, Central Florida, UCF brass at Big 12 Media Days about a Houston UCF rivalry, a space race theme rivalry. And I believe it was the athletic director. I could be getting my names confused here, but they said they were open to it. And so it opened the can of worms here for another discussion about a space-themed rivalry between these two institutions. Houston is Space City, the University of Houston, therefore the University of Space City. It's going to be on the football stadium, right? UCF was a Central Florida's created literally for NASA by NASA, right? Like those two schools have that it's actually a thing, right? Unlike a lot of schools in the conference, both of these schools are not in your traditional college towns. UCF is in Orlando. Houston is obviously in Houston. Those are big cities that, frankly, if the college football teams aren't good, there are other things to go do in town. If I were trying to sell someone to visit Houston, I could sell them on things to do in Houston that are not going to see the university, although I would say going to see a game is a fun part of that, right? I can do the same thing in Central Florida land. Hey, go to Disney World, right? Like there's a whole other set of things to do. It's a big college. It's a big town. It's not necessarily a big college, but it's a well-funded university in a big city, right? This is the third conference shared between these two programs, right? I think that makes this interesting that it hasn't happened yet, right? When looking at like, well, why hasn't this? Is the third time they're in the same conference. I do think there's a cool trophy to be had with this one. A space helmet that you put on after the winner, the MVP puts it on their head, and you can like flip the visor up and like I think that's a fun thing to do. I don't mean to like dismiss that as not a cool aspect of this. But I do think the conversation opens up a separate one. College sports are made up of rivalries. The rivalries are part of the fun. And bluntly, when Houston was left out of the initial Big 12, when the Southwest Conference dissolved and Houston was not left into the Big 12 with Texas and A&M and all of them, right? A lot of their rivalries just dissolved with it. And in pro sports, so many guys are friends, right? Like the Packers and Vikings, the fans don't like each other. The occasional corner and receiver, they play each other twice a year. They might not like each other. The occasional coach that coach against but it's not consensus. There's usually people on both sides that get along. Even like the Eagles and the Giants, right? Philly and New York and ultimately there'll be guys on both teams that want to insert college and are buddies. They share a locker room or whatever, right? In college, that doesn't happen. Even in NIL transfer portal world, you have like Army spends the whole year saying beat Navy. Texas A&M's fight song still takes shots at Texas at Austin. Ohio State spent an entire week or more crossing out M's all over everything they do. An Alabama fan went to prison for poisoning trees on Auburn's campus. Now, that last one might be a little too far, but ultimately that energy, that enthusiasm, that craziness is what makes college sports great and what makes them better than pro sports, right? When you make the argument for college sports, it's not that the product on the field or court is always better, although sometimes it is comparable, at least aesthetically, because of whatever rule or what have you. It is more about the passion. Rivalries drive that passion. And whether it's UCF or whatever, now that you're in a new conference, the Big 12, you spend a couple years in this, you kind of understand the lay of the land. It is probably time to start building that out. And Central Florida feels like an easy one, the space race, etc. I do think there's some in-state animosity with Texas Tech, another public institution, big basketball program with McCaslin there right now as well. I could see that being a comparable thing. Obviously, there's a large tech presence along with several other alumni groups in Houston, right? So that'll make for some fun there. It's kind of the two ends of the stage, you get the city folks and the rural folks and all that too, right? Baylor's, I think, the closest in terms of proximity in the conference. I could see that being different. It also is two old Southwest Conference folks, much like Tech, private versus public, again, city versus Waco, and all that kind of stuff. TCU, you can add in some DFW versus Houston, although TCU is kind of in Fort Worth, isn't Dallas, but you kind of get the DFW Metroplex versus Houston. There's something there, but regardless, you need something. I even joked on social media, going back and forth, and led into a texting conversation with our host of Locked On Sun Devils, Arizona State Sun Devils, Richie, right? The I-10 rivalry, which involved UTEP, dissolved with all this conference realignment this time around. And I was saying, Phoenix and Houston are both on I-10. we could just take the trophy or some version of it. They also have the same hand sign, which I have on my shirt today. Not that was actually a coincidence, but you can have some fun with that. Make a longer I-10 rivalry between Phoenix is, I guess, right next to Arizona State, and then Houston or whatever, right? Something there. You're both new to the conference, again, the same hand sign or whatever. There's something to be had there as well. But whatever the case is, you kind of need to start forcing that, even if it's Tech, even if it's Baylor, even if it's whoever. Central Florida, Iowa State in basketball has been a fun one, obviously. Kansas in basketball has been a fun one too. Um, I think though that what people are too afraid to admit is it's gonna feel a little artificial at the start. You're reinvigorating, restarting, resparking some of these emotions that have just not been in the athletic program for the better part of 30 years, right? I mean, yes, in 1985, the goal was to beat those guys in Austin. Yes, in 1987, the goal was to beat those guys in College Station. Yeah, that was real. I don't mean to say it wasn't real, but you hadn't played them enough times and you don't really play them anymore outside of if you want to schedule some non-conference stuff, that'd be kind of crazy. Would be fun though. You don't really play them all that often, so you can't call someone your rivalry that you just flat don't play. The Big 12 is probably going to have to play some sort of a hand in this too. We know scheduling has been interesting. They haven't protected every rivalry across the conference. Yes, Utah and BYU play each other. Arizona State play each other. Those kinds of things, but it's not as concrete across the whole conference always. So the conference will have to play some sort of a role. But I do think part of the reason the space race conversation comes up with Central Florida, Houston, the Tech conversation, whatever it is, I do think Houston needs this. I do think college sports in general needs this. We kind of created it in the American with Memphis. Full disclosure, part of that was because they beat us a couple times in the early stages of it. Right now, I can talk about 2023. I guess they beat us once with Sasser hurt, but outside of that, like the early stages of that hatred and rivalry were because Houston beat them, and then because Memphis beat Houston, then Houston beat them back, and then you had like the football game with the crazy comeback and all those kinds of things, right? The half court shot from Tremont Mark and all of that. And Jamal Shed hit a buzzer beater against them too. Like all of those things add up, right, to make a rivalry. That felt like it was naturally building, but now you're not seeing them anymore, right? There was something with SMU too. I felt like we had the kickoff return and all that. There was some fun stuff there. The crazy high scoring game Houston was on the wrong side of it, football. DFW, Dallas, Houston, I think created a natural rivalry there too. But as you're building this out, I think people are scared of doing it because the start will feel artificial. And I think that's just part of the bullet you got to bite with it. Honestly, I think it's good for the university. I think it's necessary in college sports. And if it's Central Florida or whomever, I think it's worth investigating and going a little bit further. Speaking of investigating going a little bit further, Houston is highly recruiting trail and basketball. Big offer this week went out to a legacy basketball player that may be somewhat subtly mentioned behind my head for the video audience. We'll talk about that in just 1 second. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston Cougar basketball recruiting. And the story of the week this week in recruiting, actually, in men's hoops, was not a commitment, as Houston is doing very well in building connections to the class 2026. And, you read what different guys are saying, you hear insights about what's going on. The 2026 class is looking to stack up pretty well in comparison to previous 2025 is special. We'll see if we can replicate that or not. But the big news lately was that Aziz Olajuwon, Abdulaziz Olajuwon, son of the famous Hakeem Olajuwon, received an offer from Houston this week. Now, Aziz is a 6'6", 200-pound forward from Clements High School in Sugar Land. He's not the big fella his dad was, to say the least. Although, famously, I think Hakeem actually was a little bit shorter than his listed height always was, and actually kind of played into how much more cool it was to watch him dominate. That's not today's show. Aziz has had a meteoric rise this offseason. I say offseason, it's AAU season in recruiting. He really did go from, I think the big thing people are projecting is the continued growth and potential because of the gigantic leaps he took from last summer, 2024, before his junior year, to this summer, 2025, before his senior year, where he graduates in 2026. And I think that they're looking at that projection and saying, okay, now we just put him in our development system and watch him continue to hit those same leaps and miles. Like this is going to go a long way. Aziz is a long 6'6", uses his body very, very well, finishes both sides of the rim in traffic, strong, sturdy. He good looking jump shot. I would call it streaky still at this point, but he doesn't look mechanically wrong. Like, I think more time on task will become a really good shooter, frankly. And then credit to the JL3 program, John Lucas program. Those guys, and I've talked about them before. If you can't tell, I like that program. That AAU program actually plays pretty good defense, or at least plays really hard on defense. Don't always have the best scouting reports in AAU, so it's hard to play that kind of defense. Plays really hard on defense at a time where I think the stereotypes would tell you that AAU basketball doesn't always have that, right? Aziz is a part of that. Aziz is a solid defender that is very, very he wants to play defense. He's aggressive. He enjoys playing hard on that side of the basketball. And that's frankly, I think, why he fits with what Houston's trying to do. I think it's interesting, though, and I can't remember what outlet it was on, and I wish I could because I'd give it credit, but I couldn't go back and find it either. I heard Kelvin Sampson say one time, it was an interview with somebody, I can't remember what it was, but he said he doesn't just offer any Houston kid at this point because of where the program's gotten. And he said that Houston is such a basketball city that there's all kinds of talent across the city, right? And he even kind of expanded to Texas after that. But his commentary was that he totally understands with Houston getting to where it's gotten and playing the kind of basketball they play at the level they play at, not every high-level kid can walk on campus as a freshman and jump into that, right? Now, that's to say that that's a lot of pressure to play in front of mom, grandma, mom, and everybody in town when you've been the man in your circles at high school or whatever to then join this program. I think there'll be freshmen play this year, a lot of minutes. For what it's worth, I think at least one, if not two freshmen start on the team this year. I kind of think it's two, but that's not today's show. Um, I I feel like though he understands that like if you're from Houston, you've been the man in Houston, etc. It takes a special kind of mindset to understand I'm going to go to this program and I might not see the court for a year. I might not see the court for 2 years. And then when I get there, they're going to make me play defense and rebound, and I might get 4 shots a game. Like that takes a special kind of mindset that, honestly, is not fair to put on every kid in the area. And I think that Sampson saying that has also, like, what you could carry to, Aziz Olajuwon's name. I don't know if Aziz will pick Houston. He's been offered, right? And there are 24 offers to 2026 kids out there from Houston right now, per on three. And for what it's worth, Aziz Olajuwon showing up to Houston's campus carries a different kind of pressure than if he went to literally any other campus, right? His father being such an important figure in the important era, like the face of Phi Slamma Jamma, right? Which is like the most well documented 3 years of a college basketball program, perhaps ever, right? That is a lot of weight that he could. I mean, Aziz could go to Kentucky, Aziz could go to Kansas, Aziz could go to Duke. It won't weigh the same, and so I don't know what he'll do, but I do think that that's probably part of the slow play here. I also will admit that another part of the slow play was probably that Aziz has had this gigantic leap from last summer to this summer in terms of how much he's developed this game, how much work he's put in, how much it like he's just a different player now than he was then. And in watching that JL3 team and watching them work out and watching them play, I would point out too that quite frankly, it wouldn't have been fair to put that pressure on a kid that played last summer. This summer's a different kid, right? And so that's a little bit different. Now, in the 2026 class, they've got 24 offers out. Like I said, only 6 of those are kids from the state of Texas. 21 of those 24 are kids that have 4 or more stars in the consensus composite reporting. 8 of them are 5 stars, and 3 of them are actually what you call a 5-star plus, meaning that there is no recruiting outlet that has them lower than a 5-star, right? So we'll see where that goes. I think the trio of small forwards that I think they're really close with are Bryson Howard from DFW, son of Josh Howard, um, Christian Collins, the big 5-star kid, is another small forward, kind of wing forward kind of guy. And then Aziz, I think they're very close with all 3 of those kids. We'll see who ends up coming or not coming, obviously. I think what's interesting about those 3 wing forwards, like I wouldn't quite call them big guards, but I wouldn't quite call them power forwards either. They're listed as small forwards for a reason, I guess. Is they all have really different skill sets. And really kind of different ways of scoring. The consistent thing is they all play really hard and aggressive on the defense side of the floor, but you've watched Houston play basketball, you know that's a big thing, right? Really, really interesting to see how that pans out. I will say that if Aziz were to commit to Houston, you'll probably see social media erupt because the expectations, the excitement. I mean, you're seeing other fan bases comment below his offer tweet that like he should go to Houston because no one's going to love him like Houston, right? And I will say that part, as while the pressure is also there, that part is also probably true. The guy is going to wear Olajuwon in his jersey. He's worn 15 for JL3. I think he wears it for Clements too. I don't think he'd be trying to wear the 34 hanging in the rafters or behind me. But I do think it's worth pointing out that that's a pretty cool deal in and of itself. Now, this would not be the first legacy any schools had or anything like that. I don't mean to act like that's crazy. And frankly, I still think it would have been cool if Ricky Winslow's son Justice, who was a high-end recruit and going to Duke, if he'd come to Houston. I guess the other Winslow kids did, but that's not here or there. Anyway, fun conversation to be had. The daughter did, I guess I should say, but fun conversation to be had. We're tracking that as well. Right now, I've got a trio of people sending me stuff, clips, and commentary that cover high school basketball recruiting. They're at Peach Jam in Atlanta right now, the highest of high-end EYBL Nike tournament circuit, working to get someone on after it's over to kind of talk about some potential Coug targets, to say the least. Now, I will say the one that I think we're going to get, we have to make sure it works out with his publication, that he's okay to talk to us about stuff that he might not talk to them about. So we're working on that for you to make sure we get some Peach Jam wrap up. They're playing right now. I think the semis and the finals are on ESPN. So if you're trying to watch some recruiting, I'd imagine there's a couple of Coug targets in that as well. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Talk about Forever Cougs this weekend as well. That's going to be Friday's episode. More on all kinds of things Houston recruiting and rivalry and space races and all kinds of stuff each and every day here at Locked on Coogs. So hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know that we are live. Locked on Coogs, Premier, the Locked On Podcast. Now is your team every day. Go Coogs.